if times could be measured, this would be the most significant term in the planetary shift. Because this planetary shift that we're going through is not just as previous ones a physical one. It is a conscious one, and all the biocircuits are being activated in order to free the lower consciousness of the human being on planet Earth so that he and she can fully acquire the dimensionality for which we were created. What does that mean? Human beings are trained and imprinted from birth onwards.
We've got your... You want to roll it back?
No, it's okay. I'll tune in from somewhere.
Is it okay now? Okay.
From the moment of birth, we are imprinted. We are imprinted into a conditioning that allows us to function through the survival basis. And the first circuit that a human beings learn, and which all humanity, is the activation of the survival, also known as the reptilian brain. This reptilian brain, the primordial way of knowing that we must survive, what has been also called the instinct of self-preservation, has been domineering of our consciousness for eons. Not for thousands of years, as written history records, but for eons we have learned to survive. Our basic DNA therefore knows that we survive. But our consciousness has been activated into the second circuit for thousands and thousands of years to know how to emotionally survive. And this second brain, which has been activated, has also come to a maturity point today. And this maturation enables us to see that over the last few thousand years, a new brain has been installed. And this new brain has been the brain which has acquired mindfulness. So we have survival, feeling, and mindfulness. And mindfulness elevates itself to language. And as we learn to language, we start to begin to understand that we know, and that we have a mastery over our system. The fourth circuit that has been activated throughout history has been the productivity circuit. And productivity means procreation in order for mindfulness to feel itself and at the same time to know that it can survive. 4 circuits, and we have the current human being. But what has happened simultaneously on the planet throughout this large evolution of life? We have had the fire age, the time in which the planet released itself and the sun became the father-mother source, and the planet started to contract matter in order to become more and more solid, less and less fiery, and more consistent with itself. That consistency turned into a period of ice and water, and later into a period of solidity, ocean and earth. And we believe that the civilization that we're now living on is the result of this consolidation of the 4 circuits of this brained individual, simultaneously with the shifts of consciousness from fire through ice to water and to earth. But as I was saying before, we are moving into a new brain, a new consciousness, a new earth. And what is this wonderful event that is taking place? The shift of electronic force fields which allow for the consciousness to move to its next dimension, allow also for the planet Earth to tilt the vibratory axis of the electrons, and instead of occupying space and time, moves itself into a new, what we would call here, dimension, which is a dimension that does not occupy space and does not occupy time, and that we call beyond the 4th dimension, that is beyond the grid, in which the individual, as I was saying before, survives, feels, relates, personalites, so to speak, and consciously mates to produce and procreate survival on the 4 previous dimensions of existence. As the electronic tilt exists in awareness, it also exists on the planet. And therefore, it activates a new brain that, not to fall into extraterrestrial notion of abductees or UFOs or other notions that are seen with third-dimensional eyes, we would call the 4th brain, the new brain. The brain which is not occupying a knowledge of time and space, but which accesses divine consciousness, as we would call it, while the planet is shifting into an existence in which it has already embodied, so to speak, and secured survival, love, feeling, consciousness, and selfhood, and starts to radiate light into other worlds and other dimensions, the same as it becomes our duty to mature to the next circuit of our own brain, which is the purpose of radiating light, love, health, happiness, and full self-expression of the individual. Not for survival purposes, not for mating purposes, not for productivity purposes, but for ecstatic purposes. What is ecstasy? Ecstasy is therefore the shift of consciousness by means of which we do not detach and leave behind, but we comprehend and ascend our awareness into the next dimensional shift, which entails the human spirit and the ecosystem or the ecology of the whole planet and the whole human race, and most probably all of life. The DNA, which is the messenger which tells constantly the body about the production of enzymes, about the growth of a fetus into a baby and an embryo into a fetus, that allows for certain shifts so that the undercurrent waters can go to a certain field and irrigate, that allows for clouds to start pouring and permit the rain. The DNA, what has been called the desoxyribonucleic acid, which contains the basic message of to life, to life, to life, is now activating throughout our whole transition team called humanity, life force, and planethood, a new consciousness, a new identification, a new identity, and it is a cosmic identity. It is an identity that allows us to become fully secure in our productivity, in our mating, in our relating, in our mindfulness, in our survival, not because of evidences that prove themselves right in order to fulfill the mission of each circuit, but because of the affirmation or the declaration of the statement that I am divine, I am that I am cosmic, I am that I am eternal. And the linguistic of the previous circuit therefore activates the opening of the new brain vibratory frequency, of the new tilt that is not provable scientifically in the 3rd dimension, neither with parapsychological knowledge, neither with physical knowledge, because it corresponds to a simultaneous existence here and what we would call there. That is in the eternal here and nowness that has been taught by mystics of all religions, that has been looked for in the unified field of Bohm, of Einstein, of the quantum theory, but it is an experience. And it is an experience of implosion of the consciousness throughout all the circuits into the opening of other circuits of activation, so that we can fully comprehend and fully understand that we are. Most of human problems on planet Earth are the fear of forever never being. I will repeat this. The fear of non-survival, but not just in the physical, but in the emotional, in the mental, in the spiritual, in the relationship, in the productivity, in the survival, and finally, in what has been spread around for years now in the apocalyptic consciousness of the destruction of a civilization or the destruction of a planet or the destruction of a culture. But forget about that. It is not the destruction. It is just the fear of the destruction, because the basic fear can only be cured with the basic knowledge, and the basic knowledge is the knowledge of eternity. But the knowledge of eternity is not the eternity of the third-dimensional immortality, but the knowledge of the immortality of the soul awareness, as the soul recollects itself with the knowledge of this and other lifetimes, of personal, impersonal, interpersonal, transpersonal, social consciousness, and brings it all together like the alveoli of a lung into one package of knowledge, into one package of information whose boundaries disappear, and as they disappear, the spirit of the living God, the spirit of the living force animates itself. That which has been called Allah or Jehovah or the Christ or the atom or the knowledge of the inner silence permeates the fullness of the soul, and we shift from the identity that I am surviving to the identity that I am surviving because I'm loved, to the identity that I am because I think, to the identity that I am because I mate and produce, to a fuller identity which includes all the above in this and many other lifetimes, in this planet and in other planets, and allows deeply for the fully filling, for the fulfillment of the divine force, which is the electricity, not the created electricity, but the basic electricity of the electronic force, which constitute the tilt that goes from dimension into dimension into dimension. And this is not an esoteric versus exoteric knowledge. This is not an inner versus an outer knowledge. This is the wholeness of the knowledge of the certainty of being and the beingness that is constantly expanding throughout all universes and multi-simultaneously occurring. These words might sound difficult, so I will simplify them, because you know it all already if you relinquish ignorance. What is the ignorance that I'm talking about? It is not the ignorance of not knowing, but it is the ignorance of believing that we know what has been fed into us to make us electroids, to make us, instead of humans, humanoids, to make us, instead of divine, socialite. So we need to begin an inner work process, which is the process of releasing that which we have learned and asking ourselves very, very, very deeply, do I sincerely know what I believe? Do I sincerely believe what I have been told? Do I sincerely trust that what I have been told has come from the source of the individual that has been telling me that? Or is it just mass hallucination? The disease of our century, the disease of our planet, may be the disease of all of creation, which is the secondary thought about a vital experience of the vital identity of the self that I am, that you are. So we need to do a deep process of examination. The deep process of examination is deep only if our spiritual skin is thickened by information which is not conducive to the full aliveness and empowerment of the knowledge of the statement of the mission of why we exist. Today, when we see teenagers or we see young people, they all present a syndrome of frustration. Because on one level, we have fed them information how the world is right and is supposed to be, and on the other side, we are telling them that there is unemployment. There is no more need for more of the same. There is the necessity for creativity, and yet creativity does not touch the source and the inner centers, but it touches the rearrangement of pictures of reality which have already been presented over and over again. So we find the frustration of the young people. We found the frustration of the adults. What is the frustration of the adult? It is the frustration that if we do not produce in our adulthood, we are worthless. And our self-worth is therefore attached to productivity, which is interesting, because the circuit of productivity and procreation is needed, but yet is not the fundamental. So people in their adult life are subject to the stress of the demands of our environment, family, society, systems, and over again, they need to compete. And they need to compete on standards which are not standards of inner competence, but outer competence. And then we have the frustration of the old people that believe that they're not useful anymore because they are not productive anymore. And they go deep into their own sets of mind. And their own sets of mind tell them they are no good anymore because their productivity, their survival, their lovingness, their feeling, or their mindfulness is already obsolete. What have we done to ourselves? We have contracted divine consciousness on planet Earth, therefore to a jail. And the jail is already opened. The key has already been bestowed on planet Earth. And it is for us to release the false belief system about ourselves, our society, and start to enjoy our lives into that which is the true enjoyment, which is the consciousness of the bliss of the implosion of the particles of consciousness beyond the four circuits that I have described. That is the opening of the divine circuit of consciousness. Most people on planet Earth have a spiritual inkling. Most people on the planet have a religion, have a search, have a desire. But then they contract the desire for more into more objects, more materialism, more relation and possession, more illusions and delusions of their own mind, or more pseudo-information about themselves through the sciences of psychology, sociology, psychiatry, and theology, which are not really aiming at the awakening of the species, even though our beloved planet is claiming from us the necessity to become awakened fully and unite ourselves with a new common purpose. What is the new common purpose that we need to empower? The new common purpose is the empowerment of the salvation of the common unity of planet Earth. Not because the planet will disappear, but because as we have endangered the conditions of survival for humanity on the planet is sending us feedback so that we can get it together. But look, we cannot get it together on survival, because we have already realized that it doesn't matter how much we got, it is never enough when the energy that is fed from source is not encompassing the next circuit, which is love. The next circuit of love is also a never-ending reel, a never-ending story. Because no matter how much love and affection an individual can have, if the context of that is not the mind which is fully filled of a direction, of a mission, of a service, then it becomes an addiction. And planet Earth is already full of addictions. Addictions to alcohol turned into addictions to drugs. Addictions to drugs, addictions to sex, addictions to work, workaholism, all has become an addiction. Addiction of exploitation of the natural resources, addiction of saving the natural resources, because the next circuit needs to be activated. Divine productivity. Not physical productivity, but divine productivity. And then each individual has to ask himself, what am I truly doing here? What is my purpose? What is the purpose of human life? And to me, there's only one answer, and there are 6 billion forms of manifestation of the answer. Don't get me wrong, it is not my answer. Each individual has to find the expression of the answer. And the answer is the spiritualization of planet Earth. Coming to the beginning of this talk, coming to the understanding and the awareness that our presence here is like a channel, not for specific information, but for the spiritual, high intensity, fast, accelerated, intelligent, increased life extension and space migration, so that we become channels of star seeds, so that the planet, the same road that it has been taken in becoming a satellite, so to speak, of the sun, becomes a star, so that the human, which has taken millions of years of evolution, finally accesses the empowerment of that portion of his DNA to remember that in store was the divinity to be able to be expressed and brought down. So much argument and so much discussion between creationists and evolutionists on planet Earth. Are we descendants from monkeys that have evolved, or are we divine seeds that have flourished here? It is not one and it is not the other. It is both and a third one. It is us, this triplet of adenine, guanine, and cytosine that compose the basic structure of the DNA, which exists throughout the whole universe. The biochemical structure, which is conscious of itself, the same as each cell we understand now in medicine as parentheses. We create healing from the intracellular structure into the cellular memory in order to activate a healing process. Each atom is conscious of itself. Each molecule is conscious of itself. Each organ is conscious of itself. Each adenine, cytosine, and guanine. Each component, tripletic component of the desoxyribonucleic acid, of the DNA, of the genetic chromosome, of the basic structure of color, chromo, color, some, body, body of color. What is body of color? Body of light. What is body of light? Light activation. What is light activation? The triplet which has been spread out in a fantastic divine genetic experiment throughout all universes. It takes a certain time on this planet for this triplet to become organized in the presence of solar light, energy, light force, to organize itself in primitive life forms that evolve. And as they evolve, we reach over millions and millions of years the human, the wonderful human, which when evolving through all the other stages is not anymore the wonderful human, but is the human at the present time marvelous crossroad. Will he just remain confined to materialistic consciousness, another piece of conscious elements, or will he access the rest of the memory bank of the computer universal system of the galactic intelligence, which will enable him and her, you and me, us, to live a normal life on this planet with access to the multidimensionality of the heritage of spirit, which religions have tried to point out and unfortunately remained in a biocircuit of survival, but is the activation of that other triplet of consciousness the next step in our human evolution, so that we can honor God, the creator of all that is, at the same time as the scientific knowledge of evolution of the biochemical force, which enables this synthesis to come forward and make the beginning of a new race. So many people throughout history have wanted to create new races. We have had political movement. We have had military movement. We have had racism. We have had all this distortion through the shadow of demonic and satanic fourth-dimensional entities to control humanity into a lower vibratory field. Maybe now is the time to activate the synthesis of a new race, which is not exclusive, but it is all-inclusive, which is the awakening of the force field of divine love in the circuitry of the totality of the direction of the freedom, the same freedom that star seeds beyond time and space, and for this dimension, long, long time ago, were pushed through the universe for this marvelous experiment called life, your life, your love, your service. Thank you. Would you like some? Hello?
Oh, no, thank you.
Would you like anything?
No, I'm okay.
Was that too abstract?
Pardon?
Was that too abstract?
No.
Because I get going and
absolutely vital, I feel,
Yes. I agree with you. I remember about 15 years ago, I was in
This level of comprehension and this vibrational level. So there's comparisons.
Yeah.
And but tell us something of your work, Doctor.
Okay, my work is the evolution of a work of healing which made me aware from the beginning of my career as a medical student that there are at least 4 or 5 levels of medicine. The basic level is the level that I studied in medical school. I also studied psychology, so I also studied in psychological and psychotherapeutic training. And it is the level that is the basic third-dimensional knowledge. Medicine, surgery, on the traditional mode, in the alternative level, homeopathy, acupuncture, healing of herbs, pharmacology. But I would see, in medical school still, that some people applying to them the same treatment and the same care would respond completely different. And it was dependent on the level of responsibility that they would take for their well-being. And I remember very, very clearly, this is back in the 60s, people that had cirrhosis, liver cirrhosis, and there were alcoholics. And some of them obviously would die, no matter what was done, and some of them would convert religiously, and they would become evangelical, so to speak, Protestants. Being the country where I was living, Chile, mostly Catholic, this was a shift. And one of the rules that was applied to them in this Protestant conversion was to promise by Christ not to drink. I know this is not happening in this part of the world, but that was part of the rule. The same as, parentheses, when the Mormons came to Latin America, they gave people that were jobless work. They built hundreds of temples. So they gave construction work, and they converted because of that. So much for religious conversions. But what I was seeing in the medical aspect of this was very interesting. Cirrhosis did not progress in those people who had become responsible, committed. By Christ, I will not drink. By Christ, cirrhosis stopped. So I saw that there was, and that opened my interest in psychiatry at that time, being a medical student, that there was a level of empowerment, of responsibility, of saying so, that would enable a person to heal themselves. Second level of medicine, called responsibility. Third level, if a person would not have a reason for living, no matter how much responsibility, the healing process would not last. And I looked at what was the cause of the reason for living, and it was a bottom line, a common denominator. It was for love. Love that could be projected into, I can't die because my family needs me, I love them, they love me, or my work needs me, and ultimately, because I love life. See, the excuse could have been the projection of the love into others, but the truth was that when a person activated the circuit of their own self-love, of their own true self-esteem, the healing process would come. Third level. And fourth level, I saw the soul. That when an individual started loving his life, the realm of his soul awareness, of his soul remembrance would be activated. And therefore, that would universalize the healing process and would take it out of healing. And I became more and more interested in wholeness than in healing. That is, instead of repairing, preventing. And nowadays, instead of preventing, remembering so that we can plug in into the true health, which is the consciousness of peace. Not the external peace necessarily, because tranquilizers give an external form of peace, tranquility, which not necessarily is the peace of the relaxation of the intracellular being, of the intracellular memory. So my work shifted from a strictly medical to a psychiatric, to a psychotherapeutic, to an educational, to a spiritual guidance, so to speak, to a planetary missionary responsibility. And as this was shifting, I was also remembering more and more of past lives in myself, of the mission of myself, and making sense of the interdimensional vision that I always had as a kid, and that I believe most kids have. My almost 3-year-old daughter kicks out certain entities, certain energy fields, which she calls by name, and that when I ask her to describe, she describes as if there would be an animal form. And visibly to the naked eye, they are not there. So I started seeing that the work I was truly committed was beyond medicine and was beyond healing. I actually did a few seminars in Los Angeles years ago, which I called Beyond Healing. Because healing, medicine, and let me generalize it now to most of a statesmanship, political and sociological problematics, needs the definition of a problem in order to find a solution. And the problem-solving approach creates, therefore, a necessity to find more problems and therefore to create them in order to have more solutions. And that's another prism for something which is beyond the problem-solving approach and which has been risky on planet Earth, since we like to activate emergencies when we have them, or to create them in order to activate and justify them. And I want to tell you a little anecdote. I was in the United Nations in 1978 in Geneva, and I was speaking with this department of disaster relief. And I was taking the same things. This is 14 years ago. And they said, what will we do if we don't have disasters? I said, so you need to create disaster in order to have relief for the disaster. We need to create refugees in order to have a department, a chief administrator for refugees. We need to create problems in order to solve problems. And most people in their innermost consciousness create disease in order to have healing, because the belief is that growth comes after pain, that health comes after solving the problem of disease, and that education comes after stupidity, ignorance, and not being able to function. And I shifted my whole mode of thinking to an acceptance that there are two roads in my life. And I invite you to consider that. There is the path of knowledge, and there is the path of ignorance. The path of knowledge assumes that we know some things and we operate from there. That our left brain therefore has sufficient skills for the right brain sometimes to pop in and to have a comprehensive life. And we train our children to know, and we have been trained to know, and that brings us back to the biocircuit of survival through knowledge. But I looked honestly within, and I knew that I knew much less than I did not know. And I said, I'm going to choose the other path. I'm going to choose the path of ignorance. I'm going to live this life absolutely knowing that I ignore much more than I know. And that the little additions of what I am knowing in this immense path of not knowing are simply experiences which are training me on the walking of the mystery path, of the path of not knowing. And the path of not knowing allows for something that I think is going to start permeating on planet Earth, which is openness, allowance, dialogue, trialogue, cooperation, because we're as ignorant as can be in the vastness of what might be to know in the unfoldment of our DNA and the unfoldment of the whole universe. There is so much we ignore. There is so much that if we voyage to the ends of our knowledge, we sit in front of a void that is saying there is so much more to discover. Now, the path of not knowing is a path of discovery, and the path of knowledge is a path of crystallization. Because every time we have been trained that we know something, our identity believes that it becomes what it knows. And therefore, it is a path of hardship, of contraction, of solidification, of ego, of planetary suppression. Not knowing allows us to discover and allow us, as I was saying before, a common purpose. How about uniting human on earth to discover more and more and more of the vastness, and not to translate discovery just into survival? For that, we must solve the problem of survival. For that, we must solve the problem of food, of shelter, of clothing, of communication, of transport. But we will never solve that problem till we find a new common purpose, which I was calling before the salvation of the planet, but it's beyond the salvation of the planet. It is a common purpose, which is, let's truly find out. Let's discover. Let's stop assuming that we have to create disease in order to get healed, and we have to create droughts in order to have the commodity price raised, and we have to create wars in order to have missiles to protect ourselves against imaginary situations that will bring peace. That's not peace. That is just little truths. And we've lived on that for a long time. Now, you see, my work has gone from working with individuals, which I still do, on what I call spiritual psychotherapy, but I'm truly interested in working with those individuals that when spiritual psychotherapy comes to an end, that means the extinction of the work action that I do, those people are empowered to go out and communicate in the process of discovery instead of become addicts of therapy or addicts of healing, of addicts of a new channeled information or addicts of a new data on extraterrestrial. Because there is enough data already here to solve politically, in not old politics, but in new politics, food, shelter, clothing, borders, etc. I was with the commander-in-chief of some Air Force in South America, and I said, would it be interesting to close the borders of the whole Latin American continent and say we can be at peace inside and use the Air Force for transport, use the Navy for fishing, use the Army for the design of the building of roads and the strategy of geopolitical instruments that instead of being geopolitical of enmity are geopolitical of togetherness? And you know, this guy, even though I am not a national of that country, and most military and high command are very leery when they're talking with foreigners about this, he said, this is the best idea since Simon Bolivar that wanted to create one Latin American empire. I think it's too late for a Latin American empire. I think it's time for a planetary empire, for a planetary wholeness. And you asked me about my work, and look where it's gone. That's where my work is going right now. I think we need to wake up something that we already know and heal ourselves even from the healing process. You know, I was, a couple of days ago, my wife was not feeling well. And it was a fantastic experience. Not that she wasn't feeling well. It was a fantastic experience to see that I went through a diagnosis procedure that I had learned in medical school and came to a point of not knowing what was really going on. I took her to a local doctor, and he went through exactly the same procedure and went to the same point. Then I took her to the hospital, and they went through the exact thing. And you know something? That energy was there, and she started to feel better when that attention was given from the environment, and it was certified that nothing was wrong. Now, what's the interesting thing about this? Is that in the next hours, the intensity of the discomfort, of the disease, diminished. The process took its own rhythm, and I am sure she's in a mutational process that modern medicine doesn't see, that is going through symptoms of readjusting and realigning the energy, and not necessarily the need for a new left brain mental diagnosis. Maybe even the whole AIDS epidemic is defined only from a level of understanding and is not watching the mutational process that is happening today in those individuals which have chosen to manifest something for their own evolution. And I'll give you a little example on this. I was working with a group of AIDS patients at a certain point from a psychological, spiritual perspective. And one of them, through a process of relaxation, came to an understanding that he had chosen this disease. Now, this is hard because today, social agreement is that there is no cure for AIDS. And when you choose a pneumonia and you know there is penicillin, or you choose tuberculosis and you know there is streptomycin, but it's different. And he said, I chose that, and I also chose homosexual behavior. To give myself, through this avenue, a piece of knowledge that I am not my physical body, not even the sexual body, and much less the body that is now decaying to this disease. And he started to go on a healing journey. And his healing journey was a de-identification from earlier identifications, being gay, being sick, being an AIDS patient, to somebody who was a body of light training the third dimensional manifestation through the avenue of disease for transformation. Now we have three things: change, transformation, and transmutation. Obviously, from a third dimensional perspective, there was change. There were physical changes, not to deny. We can't go into this so-called New Age thinking that we deny what's going on the physical. There is change. The T lymphocytes, the T cells, are doing a different action than they were doing before. The immunological system is decaying. From a mental process, there is transformation. And those people that use disease as transformation, I had a guest here in the house for 5 weeks who had just come out of a cancer operation, and he used, after being here, the cancer as a transformative experience. He went and took care of the physicalness of it, but mentally, transformation took place. But what I want to point out is the third level, transmutation. What does it mean? That a virus, which is really DNA, another portion of DNA, and if life is one, all of it, that portion of DNA is only causing a disaster in this other portion of DNA when resistance and opposition is there. Maybe on a planetary level, the addition of this piece of DNA is affecting the vibratory field of those individuals who are mutating into another dimension. And that's not spoken about. That's too far out. Now, I know that if I would not be a medical doctor, and I would say this, it would be completely off. If I would be some New Age speaker, I'd say, well, he has the ignorance of this other. But I am acknowledging that there is a physical change, there's a mental transformative change, and we have not discovered yet that there could be a mutational change so that these individuals migrate to a new dimension of consciousness with full awareness of what went on here. And two examples to that point. I was a few weeks ago in southern Argentina, in the Patagonia, where we are building a retreat center. And I was with Mapuche Indians, local native beings from there. And these people have been very suppressed by the 400 years of the Hispanic, 500 years of Hispanic conquest. Now is the 5th anniversary of the discovery of America. And they're always very submissive. And there were some people in this workshop that I was doing. And I asked them, who won in this battle between the native and the white, barbarian, Hispanic invader? And they all said, the Spanish. I said, not correct. The Mapuche won. They gave the land away, and they went to the next dimension in consciousness. And this individual, third dimensional, physical person, said, I never thought of it that way. And instantly, this being described that a portion of his inner sense of himself activated itself fully, enlightened himself, why not use that word, and he saw not only that he had been suppressing through social information that aspect of himself, but that he was an equal, not more, an equal to the white invader, so to speak, and therefore one had served the other and vice versa in coming together to a common purpose, to a common unity of this moment of the land, of the earth. Now, how amazing. For 500 years, this genetic entity was believing that he lost. One statement like, no, and we can say this to the Hopi and to the Sioux and to the Navajo and Anasazi and the Sinagua. No. You just delegated into third-dimensional white man the custody of the land while you went to another dimension to serve the dinner when these other beings come to the next dimension and encompass the whole planet. And this I also experienced once in Teotihuacan in Mexico, in which I knew for sure that who built those pyramids was neither the Aztecs, nor the Mayas, nor the Toltecs, but were a group of beings which had completed their third-dimensional task and had moved into the eternity of life, into a new dimension of being. And as I experienced that, I met a third-dimensional Mexican policeman who validated this experience without me telling me, now you know where we all went.
What time frame are we talking when we talk of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, for example, or the pyramids of I mean, are we talking millions of years?
No, we're talking. We're not talking about 6,000 years. We are talking about one day, which is about 26,000 years, which is a period of time in which the vortex of energy where the pyramids were built were signposts for a new inhalation, exhalation process of the spiritualization of the planet. Unfortunately, this information disappeared with the burning of the Alexandria Library. We speak about Akashic records, we speak about cosmic memory, but basically we are in a stuck point of 6,000 to 7,000 years, and maybe if you look at the Vedas, of 10,000 years of informatics about this era. Pyramids are prior to that, and the Sphinx is probably much earlier than that. Probably much, much earlier than that, as signposts of Atlantean and earlier than Atlantean. There are two Atlantis. There is one Atlantis, which is a recent one prior to Egypt, and there is the old Atlantis, which is the first migration of this DNA consolidation. Now let me tell you this. On one level, we're talking about 26,000 years of civilizations which have happened prior to this one. On another level, I was speaking before about millions of years of evolution of this Homo Australopithecus and Neanderthal man, and which is also correct. Carbon 14 says 40,000 years, 150,000 years. A man of Peking, 165,000 years ago. It's true. 165,000 years is much more than 26,000 years. One. Civilizations form themselves through the evolutionary process, function, and destroy themselves, and now this is my personal belief, when the original purpose is deviated. So Atlantis self-destroyed itself. Rome self-destroyed itself. My understanding is, why did Rome self-destroy itself? Rome was a perfect empire. Why was it so perfect? It was organized in a way of acceptance. Wherever the Roman legions went, they would accept the beliefs, the customs, the habits of the people. Mark Antony went to Cleopatra, and Isis and Thoth and Horus and Anubis were accepted. They became Roman gods. They would go to the Mitra area in the war with what was called the Persians. They would incorporate. They would incorporate. Rome was conquering the world, was organizing the world, was bringing a law, was bringing an order. When Rome became Christian by decree, not by transformation, but by decree, it self-destroyed itself. Why? Because if the mission was to encompass a planetary culture, or so to speak, what was known as planet at that time, Mediterranean and that zone, and everything was okay, Venus was Aphrodite. Call it Venus, call it Aphrodite, it was okay. And suddenly it becomes, by decree, a one-god culture, and everything else becomes excluded. It fragmented itself. Atlantis knew about interstellar travel, but missed the love, and therefore set itself out to the conquest. It destroyed itself. Homer speaks of it as if it would be a myth. Maybe it was word of mouth, generation after generation. The Hopi and the Tibetan destroyed themselves in some way by their exclusivity. I've had conversation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and sometimes I'd like to show you a film that I have with him of a dialogue on this. What happened that Tibet, with perfect meditation knowledge, in 1959 destroyed itself? It was playing exclusive. It was not spreading the knowledge of the Kala Chakra to the whole planet, which this Dalai Lama is doing more than anybody in history of Tibet. He was aligning in his previous incarnation of Dalai Lama with the Emperor of Japan, with Hitler, and with Mussolini, and wanted to be special, It destroyed itself. We almost came to self-destruction 6 years ago on this planet. Nuclear knowledge. Knowledge of fission. Of course, we have suppressed knowledge of fusion, which would allow us to fusion the atom, create electricity with much less waste than radioactive fission, but we would have to come to an inner fusion first, and that we have not arrived. Instead, we have done the inner fission and divided ourselves and divided the wholeness of humanity. We've come very close, 1986. First it was 3 Mile Island in the United States, then it was the mirror image, Chernobyl in the Soviet Union, in the Ukraine. But this time, the possibility was to destroy mass civilization. And these human beings are loved by ourselves, and here I'm saying this, represented in other dimensions. We are the extraterrestrial. We are the gods in the Olympus. We are the gods in the Valhalla. But we're functioning in a third-dimensional body. We're functioning here. We are the wholeness, the whole universe, representing itself in one point of reality in order to master the spiritualization of this point of reality. So this time, we stopped ourselves. And isn't it amazing that in less than a couple of years, denuclearization happened? When thousands and thousands of millions of dollars were invested throughout the world to build atomic bombs, suddenly it's to destroy atomic bombs. We have turned. The harmonic convergence of 1987 shifted the dial. We went beyond 12 o'clock, a new day, a new expansion of consciousness. There is no need for more contraction. The ego is solid. As I was saying before, it already survived. We already made it. The planet is solid. It already made it. It's not going to come another ice age. It's not going to come another melted age. The temperature might go up with the greenhouse effect. We'll control it in the next couple of years. That's no problem. But we already made the turning point. So we need to find the alignment of the common purpose, so we stop speaking sociology and politics of yesteryear. And we start speaking sociology, which is cosmology, and politics, which is Federation of Earth alignment for the future. Because we are the future. We are the future represented itself in an earlier point of time in order to evolve to our ideal ecstatic self. We already got there, the same as we already consolidated the planet. Now, unfortunately, we have Somalia. Unfortunately, we have Ethiopia. Unfortunately, we have still people sleeping on top of this air-conditioned heating system in the subways in New York. Why? Because we haven't gotten it fully in our consciousness that we are them. I am you. You are me. He is him. We are one body. Religious people have spoken about the church is the body of Christ. The church is the ecclesia. Ecclesia means the house. House means the temple. The temple is the body. Obviously, the body is the body of Christ. All of humanity is a holographic self projection of the divine self, which in other dimension, it's playing a game of evolution consciously here.
As that awareness seeps in at all levels, and as you speak and it goes into the ether and it becomes comprehensible, how do you see it unfolding? You talked in terms of 400 years the other night.
Yes. It took Galileo a statement of possibility, a discovery, to be presented and to seep into a consciousness, and to change a geocentric position to a heliocentric position. Time is really words. Time is what takes place from the moment in which an awareness permeates a consciousness permeates a brain, and the individual dares to speak it. That's the fourth circuit, the linguistics. When an individual dares to speak it, others dare to speak it. You know about the 100th monkey effect. And it took, at that time, many, many years for it to become a rule of thumb. Of course, we're spinning around the sun. We are now changing, similarly, from an individual-focused approach to a divine approach, which in history we have already gone through, when we have ascribed responsibility to the gods or the God and been a victim of that. We are now in a point in which we are that which we have prayed for, but if it goes through the egotistical way, then we are not. Many people in new thinking believe they are God. Well, they're not. We are not. Other people believe that there is a God and we're victims, subjects of this God. We're not. We are co-creators. What does it mean to be co-creators? It means that the incidents that start to take place as they are spoken of, as we speak them, as it permeates our brain, as it activates, we start to walk our talk and to speak what we know. And that takes a time. The time of unfoldment, plus the time of letting go of old beliefs, plus the time of the joblessness that will take place on planet Earth when non-necessary for survival functions start to disappear. It won't happen overnight. It is wonderful that it won't happen overnight because it would create a catastrophe. It would create chaos. But as we speak right now, it's permeating consciousness. I am just a transducer of a certain information through my linguistic approach of some awarenesses that are coming in and that are constantly unfolding, which are allowing you and others to say whatever you want. It makes sense, it doesn't make sense, I thought of it, I already knew it. I remember once I went to a slum and I spoke to mothers which were knitting in this slum, and one woman raises her hand and said, "Oh, doctor, I thought I was just off, but I think the same way. Now we're two." The awareness is permeating, and it takes time. At the most, it'll take a couple of 400 years. Why do I say 400 years? Basically intuition. The left brain operates sequentially with particles. The right brain operates with waves. So I can see that the same way as people intuitively thought that light was particles or lights were waves, and we've come to an understanding that it is neither, it is both, it is depending on the setting and the set that it is established, a particle with an associated wave, a particle, a right brain understanding, a left brain understanding. It takes a few centuries, but what is 400 years, to have all the cells of the planet activated so that we can function in particle and in wave format simultaneously, to bring a new awareness, to develop a new culture. Imagine that the legal system of all of Latin America is based on Napoleon's, and that's 200 years old. And to make a small reform, let's not be too idealistic, it takes the transformation. Now, the transformation is accelerated. When I was in the Soviet Union the first time, it was a different Soviet Union than when I was the second time. The United States is transforming.
Was there a drastic feeling, a different feeling in the vibrations?
Absolutely. I was fortunate enough to be 2 weeks before President Reagan went in 1988 in May, and to be the day after the coup took place last 1991, August 23rd. And there was a different country. But according to what I heard before, it was already in 88 a different country. I was invited by the Academy of Sciences of Moscow, and when I was picked up, I had all the belief system that my father had told me about World War II. And the second question that was asked of me was, do you believe we're a very spiritual country? And I went to the first mass that Shevardnadze and Schultz went in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the first open mass in 70 years in a, what do you call it, Georgian Orthodox cathedral, church. And I would see people going into ecstatic trances, ecstasy, like I had never seen before in the first mass, people that were 20 and 30 years old. So that the genetic memory was there, it was activated, the new consciousness was open, the grid was open, and it took place.
That's amazing. So the genetic remembrance plugged in,
Exactly.
kicked in.
Exactly. And why, in my opinion, did communism fail? Fail for many reasons. One, it was that you could not make forget with dialectic materialism spiritual experiences. Number two, there was a point in which the whole energy of the planet had a common purpose. Most of the so-called free world decided it was going to stop any infiltration of ideologies that were not conducive to functionality. Because one could see the dysfunctionality that's also happening in the West was happening there massively. Alcoholism was raising, the same as drugs are raising here. A dysfunctional civilization needs to leave place for a functional civilization. And what I was saying before, Rome disappeared because it became dysfunctional. This civilization is disappearing because it's being dysfunctional. And it is so all over the place. People are speaking about dysfunctional family, dysfunctional individual, dysfunctional addiction. Everything is dysfunctional. Our socio-political system is dysfunctional. Not that it's bad, it's just obsolete. We need to find a new way of, quote, solving the problems that we already have and a new cause to advance to the next millennium.
It's strange that people find it so difficult on a most fundamental basis that they don't relate health to their food habits.
Yeah.
I mean, you're watching the obesity of an incredible bad food habits, and they're watching prices, and I mean, to get on a different level of health problems accelerating, but nobody's relating it to their food habits. They're talking about the high cost of health.
Yes. Food habits, in my opinion, are definitely related to what we take in, but it's also related to how we take it in. And I have seen a lot of obesity problems and disease, the same as malnourishment, because of the fundamental choice an individual has made. We can make a fundamental choice that's basically physical, basically emotional, basically mental, or basically spiritual. A fundamental choice that is basically physical transforms itself into a condition in which the goal of life is to be, quote unquote, thin, good looking. And this is to fulfill a need that might be of the emotional world, or of the mental world, or of the spiritual world. I believe it's always of the spiritual world. So it is not the diet an individual follows, but it is the consciousness for what he is eating. What is the purpose of eating? What is the purpose of looking good? What is the purpose of holding themselves in hunger? And so in Africa also. Then about the purity of vegetarianism. Not forget that Adolf Hitler was a full vegetarian. So it is not just the food and the food habits, in my opinion. It is the whole being. It is the whole consciousness and basically the purpose. As I was asking somebody who was very sick and said, my purpose now is to get well. I asked, what for? To live the same life you were living for doesn't make any sense. You already created an outcome which current reality is to be sick. And I learned that very early in my career. 1974, I treated for a depression a bodyguard of a head of state in Latin America.
For depression?
For depression. And he came out of the depression. I went back to that country 6 or 8 months later, and he was a beast. He had taken the tanks of the National Guard to throw off the fence of the neighbors because the dogs were disturbing him. I thought to myself, he would have been much better off, and the planet would have been much better off if he would continue depressed. And I had to ask myself a question that in medical school is not considered. What is the ethics of healing? What for is a person going to get well?
What is the essence of healing? Well, what was
It's for service. It's always for a function to others. So it's always a context within a context within a context. It is not. I'm very happy that it exists. And it looks to me that in the third dimension there is free choice, free will. In other dimension, it feels like a blueprint is established. But it is a joyous blueprint. The Muslims call themselves Abdul. Many names use the ABD that has come into their presence, in their manifestation. I think that in other dimensions, the slavery of the divine is fine. I don't like using that slave term, because in this dimension, people have misunderstood and controlled each other and become slaves of beliefs about the divine, or slaves about philosophy of the divine, or religion about the divine, or churches about the divine, and that's not the slavery of the empire of God. That's the slavery of the empire of distorted awareness.
A woman said to me, your initials, your G.
No, that about 100 heads of small tour to 2 cities in Argentina, where I have groups of work that develop from metaphysics to heal world lines, my schedule.
So that's
Get their symptom. It's not, it's checklist. Because once or twice or 3 times you retreat in different